The clock starts to tick around to 1:15. So it's time to start part 2 of the HVAC Safety Summit. So welcome back. Hope you've all made yourself a drink, a refreshing drink, and are now fully revived for the second session, which is looking at safety in a wider sense. We're starting with well-being, and then we're moving on to building safety. So without further ado, can I welcome Rob Diamond of Ingleton Wood, who's going to tell us about the well standard. And I shall pop back afterwards to ask you some questions. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'll be sharing some slides this afternoon. I hope you had a good morning and found it as stimulating as I did. And yeah, I'm kind of, well, in some ways, bring it a bit together in terms that the well standard brings together various elements that were discussed this morning. And it kind of provides a certification system to show building occupiers, building users, that the building is actually stamped with the approval of the well building standard, which I'll introduce to you. So to say, firstly, I personally have worked in BREEAM for 15 years and in sort of environmental buildings for over 20. And in a way, I'm always looking for the next big thing. And this is sort of billed as the next trillion-dollar industry, wellness, health and wellness. And I'm sure many of us are wearing Fitbits. And perhaps, you know, over this last year of being in lockdown, we've all been out for more walks and just been more aware of nature and probably looking after ourselves a bit better as well. So well is the vehicle for buildings and organisations just to deliver more thoughtful, more intentional spaces actually that are human focused, that are going to enhance human well-being, human health. And what's interesting, of course, is, you know, a building operator, a building owner, actually, when it comes to the financial side, of only spending around 1 to 3% on the actual energy costs. Obviously, operation costs can vary, maybe up to 39%, but actually, it's all about the people. It's all about the people that are working for you. So that's where the majority of the money goes, on salaries and benefits. So obviously you want happy employees, because happy employees equals productive employees. So I'm going to kind of go into the concepts in a bit more detail. I'm not going to kill you with technical details, but obviously I'm happy to answer questions at the end. We'll look at the concepts in well, and yeah, and to show why it is currently, you know, the leading tool for health and well-being across the world. There's over 5,000 projects have now been certified, and that is worldwide, pretty much now, 66 countries. And also, I'm just going to take this opportunity to say a little bit about the new Well Health Safety Rating, which I think is particularly pertinent for this conference. So yeah, just to run through the concept. So it's similar. Those that know BREEAM know that those that know LEED is kind of a similar kind of thing. So you've got 7 sections, categories, the well standard calls and concepts, and 100 features, which is quite handy when you're working out percentages, because when you are working out percentages, then you can work out what rating a building has. So similar to BREEAM, which is all about environmental aspects and sustainability, BREEAM, a well looks entirely at the human being, and that includes all the body systems that we are hopefully aware of. Remember from our biology days at school, if you haven't done it any much further than that, which is what I didn't. And actually, for qualification for this, I had to sort of revisit what is an integumentary system, for example, and yeah, and each of these various body systems is applicable to different well standards. So it has been thought out by doctors, health professionals. It isn't just using sort of building specialists. So each sort of category has different types of optimizations and conditions. Preconditions are those you have to do, and optimizations are then optional. And basically putting them together, you are able to then get your well certificate or your well seal of approval. The bronze is only available for shell and core buildings. And I mention that because it is possible to get a WELL Shell and Core bronze certificate. And then it starts, if you like, the baseline is a silver standard where you get 50 points. Gold goes up to 60, and the platinum is the highest rated 80 points, or 80% if you like, of each concept that you need to get hold of and do. So I'm going to run through these concepts, albeit briefly, and obviously air has been touched on incredibly well this morning, and I certainly personally couldn't do any justice to what was being said. But clearly what is important is our quality of indoor air. And how important it is. I mean, there was a great speaker this morning talking about air pollution and so forth. So he's talking about air, he's talking about improving filtration levels. MERV 13 was mentioned this morning. Yeah, MERV 13 comes up in WELL too. But various ventilation systems, making sure they're cleaned, UV and so forth, and a whole area about cleansing of ductwork, making sure air supply is up to scratch. And WELL actually targets air in particular as the very, very first and most important concept is air pollution contributes to 7 million premature deaths worldwide every year. So it's a huge area. Vast 18 features are dedicated to these standards. Just to say, actually, just before I move on, in terms of standards, WELL standard is very US based. It's seen over by the International Well Building Institute, which is American. They use a lot of ASHRAE standards, but it is transferable to, say, CIPSE AM 23, for example. Yeah, so don't feel we have to always work now back to ASHRAE standards and start knowing about pounds and all that kind of stuff. Still working kilograms and litres and so forth. Water is the next up, and that is really to promote drinking water in the workplace, in the building. It may not actually, just to add, it may not be a workplace. It could be a healthcare centre, it could be a school. So this is applicable to any sort of building, really. Majority of adults, not only in the US, but in the UK as well, spend most of their day mildly hydrated. And that's particularly pertinent if the water's not that great. I mean, water out of a tap is not that great. It's probably not that appetizing. It's probably far easier to switch on a kettle and have a coffee, which of course has the effect of dehydrating us even further. So actually, WELL is just all about making sure there's filtered water, there's clean water, pure water that's easily accessible, that encourages people to actually just go grab a drink of water. You're probably all having a sip of water now. Next section, so obviously not all the conditions are going to be relevant, but this is a particularly appropriate where there is an on-site food, and it promotes healthy eating basically, and it enables people to understand what they're eating. So obviously we're all very aware of food labelling these days, and we're all very aware of, you know, certain allergens and so forth. So this is a way of promoting that kind of thing, making sure people are more aware that people have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. So, for example, you'll get features that will particularly say you cannot advertise any unhealthy food products, any sugar-based products. You'll get credits for having fruit and vegetables, for example, much more explicitly laid out and so forth. And of course, this all goes back, well, it's the American system, back to healthcare treatments in the US. So it's trying to get away from things like obesity and malnutrition, because ultimately it makes sense that occupiers of buildings are healthy and well. Yeah, obesity rates are really rising, and not only are they rising in terms of, and the knock-on effect in terms of healthcare and so forth, but it actually can have a knock-on effect in depression and distress. So it all kind of is very, very interconnected. So you kind of, interestingly, you can't look at one without another. The next section is all about light and the circadian rhythm of the body. So probably you're all a little bit slumpy after lunch. I'm probably quite awake because I'm doing this presentation, but circadian lighting, if you've got it at home, which I don't, will pick up the lighting levels and make it more waking up. And then gradually over the course of the day will gradually dim down. So you're probably all aware of blue light at night, and you're not supposed to look at your phones and laptops for an hour before bed and so forth. So Well kind of brings this into the building, the lighting system, and it looks at obviously energy efficient LED lighting, goes without saying, but it brings in this circadian lighting levels, and it's apparently very much connected back into sleep. So actually Well's focusing on making sure people get a good night's sleep, and the lighting during the day has a massive knock-on effect on our nighttime experience. So next up is fitness. So a whole area is devoted to exercise and fitness into daily life. So Well is obviously, I mean, here's what it says on the tin about promoting active, healthy lifestyle. So what Well certified buildings do has a whole host of features, 20 in fact, to promote healthy living. So whether people have access to gym, providing things like wearables, making sure people are getting as much exercise as possible, giving time for employees to exercise, maybe offsetting gym costs and the like. And it's, you know, it's proven that, you know, most people are not getting their daily recommended exercise goals, whatever that may look like, from 10,000 steps a day or whatnot. And perhaps, you know, during the lockdown, and which I think is particularly pertinent, you know, coming out a year today, as we sort of slowly our return, do people want to go back to an unhealthy kind of lifestyle? Perhaps, you know, people have built up a bit of a going out for a walk every lunchtime kind of thing, and perhaps now that fear even of going back to the office where everybody sits at their desk working with a sandwich, you know, in front of the desk, maybe that's not something that people want to go back to. The next area, of course, is thermal comfort. So obviously, that is obviously down to the HVAC system and make sure it's optimized. So there's a whole host of features dedicated to commissioning, making sure people are happy, post-occupancy testing and discussions. And obviously, it's not just about heat, humidity control. It's also about acoustics, smells, removing the appropriate smells through ventilation rates. So actually, this is a massive area that that addresses the threats of safety. It's just as important as all the other features that I've talked about so far, and it can really have a knock-on effect in terms of productivity. People are less productive in noisy, uncomfortable buildings. Yeah, and because of that, sound is incorporated as its own special concept with 11 features, and to boost down sound transmission and noise control. So you'll get extra credits for having quiet workspaces. Different areas are given different noise ratings for different kind of meeting spaces. For example, there's credits in there that where one can sit and have discussions, so more collaborative working. I mean, I particularly personally enjoyed working at home in some ways because it's much more quiet and I'm less distracted, so I can get more done in a shorter amount of time. And no doubt some of you that have worked in open plan offices will know how distracting it can be when somebody pipes up a conversation on the other side of the room. Before too long, you're drawn into that same conversation. Next area that I'm just going to mention is around the materials that, and this is all to do with removing the harmful, the toxic substances, VOCs, for example, hazardous building material ingredients, elimination of, say, the wrong type of adhesives, water-based paints, for example, are encouraged. Yeah, and there's a whole host of features associated with reducing the amount of chemicals, not just in the construction process, but also in the operation of the building. And that obviously has a massive knock-on impact if we're breathing in harmful products. And the final concept is to do with the mind. And, you know, in a way, this is a key part to the whole Well package, really. So it's not just about sustainable buildings. It's not just about happy buildings. It's about making sure that we're mentally suitable to be able to do our work and to be happy and productive. And some areas of this is not only bringing in better ventilation systems, the circadian lighting, and making sure people are drinking water, but it brings in things like art, it brings in things like music. I mean, I often have my radio playing when I'm working, which I quite enjoy, but I wouldn't necessarily want that in the office space, for example. And in particular, it brings in biophilic design elements. So what I mean by that is, you know, you can tell a well building when you go in because there's plants, there's greenness, there's life. There's probably artwork on the walls. Perhaps there's music on the stairwells to encourage you to take the stairwells rather than to just take the lift. And it's proved that greenery in nature improves employee well-being, both in productivity and in creativity, which of course is quite an important aspect. We don't want just clones working. So just to kind of bring in, that's kind of like the standard itself. So this has now been going about 7 years, so it's still fairly new, but as I mentioned at the beginning, quite a few buildings have now been certified. But what's just been released and is particularly pertinent is the new health safety still. And well, obviously fairly well off. They've managed to get some big names, Michael B. Johnson and Jennifer Lopez, Lady Gaga, Robert De Niro, all promoting now this well health and safety seal. And I'm just going to say a little bit about that because it is so new and actually very exciting. And I think it just feeds in so well to our conference today. Yeah, and do go on the Well website and watch the video. It is quite something, you know. It's very Americanized, of course. It's quite something. So the safety rating was just introduced last year. So obviously on the back of COVID-19, some you know, healthcare professionals, government experts, architects, designers all got together to have a response on how are we going to return. You know, I know people that don't want to return to their workspace, for example, but you know, what would encourage that? So yeah, obviously the WELL standard would certainly be one way of doing it, but this is kind of, it can be done as an add-on or as a standalone, and it's to show that health and safety has been prioritised. It gives confidence through focusing on facility operations, on management, and again, like WELL, it's all third-party verified, and it can be used for new and existing buildings, and it focuses on 20 particular features, which I will just mention. So firstly, cleaning and sanitization procedures. So it talks about things like hand washing, where we all know about happy birthday and so forth. But this is ways of encouraging that, making sure non-odorous soap liquids available and so forth. It tries to reduce surface contact, so obviously a healthy cleaning regime, and making sure those cleaning practices are very regular, for example, and what products are being used is part of the features of this. And obviously, again, comes back to air, making sure particle exposure is minimized through the various filtration techniques that are fully available and have been discussed to some extent this morning. The next is around an emergency preparedness plan. So being prepared for worst case scenarios and making sure businesses have continuity plan and making sure people are able to come back and are healthy and have available things like emergency resources, and making sure spaces are resilient to deal with any changes, any new sort of possibilities, as it were. Yeah, and making sure, for example, things like sick leaves catered for, additional health benefits perhaps that are currently in place, helping people with mental health recovery. I mean, having worked at home for a year, you know, the thought of going back to a large office with lots going on, you know, that could be quite sort of scary for some. Promoting of vaccinations, and obviously promoting smoke-free environment, which is already part of WELL, of course. It includes the following features in terms of air and water, making sure ventilation rates, so important, obviously, in a post-COVID world, making sure all the treatment systems that is happening, making sure Legionella is being checked out regularly, air and water quality, making sure mold and moisture aren't building up anywhere. And from a stakeholder engagement perspective, about just generally promoting health and wellness. Obviously, we found out, over the past year that actually those that are less healthy are more likely to be hit harder with COVID. So it's kind of been proved by that very sort of nature of COVID, and things including food inspection is included as well. So yeah, these are the additional kind of things that are being brought in to fit in more with a post-COVID world. So to conclude, well-compliant buildings, they do provide a built environment that improves things like nutrition, fitness. It improves mood and sleep patterns. People want to go and work in a well building. It's bright, it's green, it's colourful, it's creative. Yeah, you've kind of got the picture, I'm guessing. Things like Google and Apple have kind of incorporated these type of well features, And in 2013 was the first sort of case, and there are many case studies now on the Well website, should you be interested and you want to see. I mean, they all have something special about them, they do stand out. But that doesn't mean that smaller projects or that existing buildings can't incorporate some of the Well features. So it doesn't necessarily have to involve a full assessment. You can download the Well manual for free. You can ask somebody like myself as a well accredited professional to assist. So you don't necessarily have to go through the whole certification, but you can, pick and choose out if you like, if you just want to improve your employees' well-being or the building's health and wellness. So this LA building, I mean, we're talking about 83% more production, 92% feeling more positive because of health and well-being, 94 had saying the space is more positive from a business performance perspective, and better, and 93% easier to collaborate with things, with others. So, this is all about making businesses more effective by making employees more productive. And it also can just be put across, to healthy buildings, healthcare buildings, for example. This is now being brought into some ITTs. I've noticed on healthcare, because obviously it's all about getting people better. Schools, education sector's got huge possibilities. Retail, you want people to stay in your shop for longer. So it's just got a potentially huge, you can see why they're billing it as the next $1 trillion industry. It's just got a huge potential. And as I said right at the beginning, for me, sustainability is where it's at, and it's with COP26 fast approaching, we are making moves in that direction. So what is the next step? Well, I say it's all about health and wellness. So thanks for listening, and look forward to some questions.
Thanks, Rob. Indeed fascinating, and wellness is perhaps a word that has become a bit overfamiliar, and a couple of the questions around this are along the same lines, which is, isn't it all a bit airy-fairy? Isn't it a bit, isn't there a danger that the image of Gwyneth Paltrow might pop up whenever you think about wellness and this kind of thing? And I guess the message is it's a serious subject with a perhaps now with an acronym that's got a little bit tarnished.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, obviously, this has been put together by professionals, by doctors and so forth. And I think we are moving, and people, the 20th century kind of people, are probably stuck a bit in the past. And I mean, this is the future. I mean, you can't really speak to, the next generation, as it were. The current generation are all about health and wellness. It's massive, and we can't sort of hold on to how it was 20 years ago. People are much more aware. I mean, people now know what they're eating. You've got all the nutritional information. You want that for your building now, and also you want to attract the best people. So I would certainly say we are now taking things like health and well-being more seriously. Yeah, I mean, we do have certain sort of high-profile celebs, promoting it, but there is a reason. I mean, people buy into that, And I mean, I certainly would like to return to a space that's about, shows concern for me as an individual. That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the take up? It's quite early days for the UK. So a two-part question. What's the take up been like so far, and how do you fit in? Because you're one of the first, aren't you, in the country? I want to say that you've got a black belt in well, but it's not that. It's something like that. Yeah. So just briefly tell us how it works from your point of view, as you know, as part of the consultancy, and yeah, how the clients are taking it up or not so far.
So yeah, I qualified very late last year, and one of my lockdown projects was to study and become a well accredited professional, so I'm a well AP. And it's really only now that I'm starting to see, as we return, people have started to show interest. And I think the first sort of big opportunity we've got as a sort of consultancy is with the NHS, because they are quite interested in the possibilities. And also, actually, just last week, I spoke to a school client who are building new school buildings and are interested as well. So it's slow. I feel like BREEAM, it's going to be hard to encourage people initially, because it's obviously going to cost money. I mean, it's not free. And I'm afraid the WELL certification is similarly priced to BREEAM. So those that have known that, it's not necessarily a cheap process. The idea is your return on investment, if you like, is longer term. So your benefits are people getting better quicker, you know, your staff not going off sick so often, and you're recruiting better staff and retaining staff. So it's a bit hard to, you know, we are financially sort of orientated in this country, and so it's quite hard to prove. And I think that's probably going to be some of the barriers that I'll be facing, is to try and convince it's worth the investment.
And is it just to be clear, is it a new building only standard, or is it a retrofittable standard?
Oh, so you can do shell and core, you can do retrofit, and you can do new build. Obviously, with new build, you've got more opportunity to build it in. But if you're doing a retrofit refurbishment project, you can certainly look at, in actual fact, maybe it's the greatest opportunity to bring in these new features, new possibilities, you know.
It's kind of like I guess it's a bit of a holistic message. You know, for our industry audience, there may be folk out there who say, well, if I get involved with WELL, I can encourage the client to actually put in the necessary measures, and you know, whether that means better ventilation or that kind of thing. But it's I imagine that not everybody's, if you're talking about retrofit, not everybody's got them at the start, have they, the necessary measures? So they've got to see the upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits in really well with our industry. I think, although there may be the, you know, those say about the airy fairy side of it, but nobody's gonna knock, you know, air quality, water quality, making sure people have got, you know, are comfortable and not acoustically lying buildings. You know, all this is things that can be integrated into our retrofit building and provide more business, provide more work for everybody really in the industry. So I've been personally, I'm very optimistic that it can really integrate well. It certainly integrates well with sustainability and BREEAM and LEED, and it's yeah, I think, as I say, I think it's kind of the next step. I think we're looking at the future here.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said, you used a phrase that was used this morning, which is a generational, and I think that's it is a bit of a message for those of us who are starting to move into perhaps the silverback area of the jungle. That, you know, that we've got to be thinking about new ways of doing things. In terms of the return on investment, I mean, I guess that's the hard issue, isn't it? Because as you say, it's much more difficult to put. I mean, I guess this was the problem with the likes of BREEAM when they first came in. It was, people were saying it was difficult to put a number on sustainability, but it is looking at the longer term again, isn't it, with the health and well-being side.
Yeah, and as I say, you know, attracting the right employees. I mean, who do you want working for you? You know, I mean, I think, you know, if you go into a, you know, an automated reception with nice plants and got music playing, perhaps some nice artwork, you soon go through the door, not only for employees, but for clients as well. Like, wow, you know, I've been in a well office, you know, so they've got kind of coffee bars on every floor, and
right,
you're sitting at your iPad on your desk, and yeah, I think it's time for some lattes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic, you know, and sort of place you want to work in, isn't it?
Yeah. And do you think this will filter down, or is it filtering down into tenders and specifications, you know, for buildings, which is, you know, that wellness element? You know, we've seen sustainability sort of trickle in.
Yeah. I think it's going to be, again, a trickling in. I mean, you know, having the opportunity to speak at this summit is fabulous because I can sort of raise awareness, but it's a case of raising awareness. And, you know, hopefully there's some people out there that are involved in planning, are involved in building design, and are inspired by that idea of well, and that's how it's going to kind of be brought in. I don't think it's going to be like a planning condition like BREEAM is. I can't see that happening. So yeah, I think it could take a while, and it's probably going to be down to individual building owners, organisations, maybe CEOs, partnerships to kind of take on board the well message. And
you were saying that the well health, how did you describe it? The module, the safety, is it safety and well-being, health and safety?
Yeah, the health and safety. Yeah,
the health and safety, that can be a standalone module in its own right.
That's right.
So what? Give me a ballpark. What, you know, to get the certification for that? What are we talking about? This is what people want to know, because they want to know whether it's worth going in for. It could be business.
It could be business. I'll do you a deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I suppose it depends where you're starting from.
Yeah.
If you're starting from a building that's already incorporating all these features, you're just talking about the certification cost, £1,500 or so. I mean, It's all in dollars. It is on the well website, all the different categories of registering and certifying. You know, you could do, you know, so if you're starting from already you just want that stamp of approval, it doesn't have to cost much at all. But if you're starting from, you know, your building's falling down and, you know, you haven't done anything, then it's going to cost a fortune.
It's a not very well building to begin with. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, where you're starting from, where you're getting to, I think.
Yeah.
So the certification fees are on the well website, and well AP skills, you know, that obviously you need to employ someone like myself, it can really vary. For like a pre-assessment, just to sit down, you know, and have a workshop, starts at £1,500, for example. And then if you say maybe going for the whole caboodle, it could cost, you know, anything up to including certification and assessing, because you need people to go back and do post-occupancy tests, could cost anything up to 20,000. But it will vary depending on assessors, well AP, buildings, you know.
But as you say, it's in the UK at least. It's the very much we're at the ground floor. So you know, anybody who does go in for this is amongst the pioneers. So there's a bit of a cachet in that, I think. Yeah,
innovators, those that are cutting edge, that want to stand out. And as I say, it is probably the blue chip companies that are doing this, but that doesn't mean smaller businesses can't do it.
It's a fascinating area, and exciting to be there at the ground floor for you and for us to cover it. So we've run out of time. So thanks very much for your time, Rob, and we'll fade you away and we'll move seamlessly on to Howell. He's in there, he's come out of the waiting room. So we move on to building safety, and the building safety regime has been quite a lot discussed. And one man has been quite vocal in this, and we're very proud to have him back to talk to us more about it. It's Hal Davis of CIBSE, and you're going to give us your latest thoughts, I'm thinking, and I'll fade away.
That's certainly the plan, Andrew. So I hope that I'm now sharing the right screen. And I hope everybody can now see the slides. And if not, I hope one of the team will tell me.
Yeah, you're all good, Hal. Good to go.
That's great. Thank you very much. So thank you, Andrew, for the welcome. I'm going to talk about how we can apply the Building Safety Bill now. And if anybody's thinking, but it's only a bill, it's not an act, how can we do that? Please listen in for the next 15 minutes or so. And I hope that that will all become a bit clearer. My day job is at CIBSE, but I'm also looking after building safety policy for something called Actuate UK. And for those who aren't familiar with Actuate UK, it was launched last month, and it brings together the leading industry and professional bodies from across the engineering services sector in a new alliance that aims to provide a single consolidated voice for UK engineering services. And it's not just about buildings, it is also looking at infrastructure as well. And I'd like to say that it is a key grouping, because I don't think you can achieve building safety or deliver net zero without the businesses and the people that are behind this alliance. So what I'm going to cover in the next few minutes is why I think we face a time of unprecedented change. The draft Building Safety Bill is out there, and we know what it says. The Building Safety Regulator is up and running and is driving change already, and it's going to be the most far-reaching review of building and fire safety legislation in half a century. It's also going on alongside greater digitalisation and modularisation and a move to more use of off-site fabrication and assembly. They are current government priorities. They're currently happening. And obviously we want to implement them safely. And we have the Climate Change Act and net zero carbon targets going on. This is all happening now. Now, I don't normally use the next slide because it is such a horrifying reminder of what happened 3.5 years ago. But I think it's important to use it today to remind us of the backdrop, the terrible backdrop to the Building Safety Bill, and to say that as we go through this, we need to bear in mind that 72 people died in that building. This reform is not just a government whim. This reform to building safety legislation is imperative. We cannot entertain the prospect of something like this ever happening again in the United Kingdom, and I genuinely hope that there is nobody who thinks otherwise. But what have we got to do to make that a reality? Well, the process started when Dame Judith Hackett was appointed to undertake an independent review to look at the current regulatory system and to make recommendations to make it more robust. And also, and again, this is so important to remember, this is about providing assurance to people that they live in safe buildings. And we're all, I think, acutely aware of the challenges that many people are facing right now with the problems that Grenfell has revealed. So I think I'd like to hope everybody's familiar with Dame Judith's report on building a safer future. And she came to one summary and shocking conclusion. The current system is broken and clearly needs to be updated and changed. And there are 4 major areas of failing that she identified. The first is around ignorance. People who aren't fully aware of the regulations or even the guidance. Anybody who followed the first module of phase 2 of the Grenfell Tower inquiry will have heard various witnesses explaining what they did and didn't know about the regulations and guidance. And I think it's very important that we don't focus on individuals, but we look at the picture in the round, which is of too many people in the industry not knowing what the regulations require and not knowing what the guidance is. And in some cases, not knowing the difference between regulations and guidance. So that was the first problem that Dame Judith identified. And then she was very clear about the problem of indifference. Far too many people in the industry, she argued, looking to do things quickly and cheaply, perhaps to a price, because that's what they've been pinned down to, and not enough attention to delivering quality homes that are safe to live in. And far too much of a tendency for legitimate concerns, whether they come from residents or others, to be ignored. And I'm not going to dwell on it now, but I'm sure we've all seen some of the stories that have come out in the last 3.5 years, and some of the difficulties that very well-known brands in the house building sector have encountered over the quality of what they have built. And then the other two areas of concern that Dame Judith, sorry, I've just jumped ahead. The other thing under indifference is that Dame Judith noted that there are far too many people who are not prioritising safety, and she suggested in some cases even gaming the ambiguities between regulations and guidance. And again, I don't want to comment on specific instances, but I'm sure we've all come across people who are prepared to argue that, well, if you read the guidance this way, then you can get away with doing that. And that clearly is a concern. And so the other two areas that she raised, a lack of clarity on who's responsible for what, and perhaps the fragmentation in our industry makes that worse and makes it more difficult to keep people accountable. And finally, a concern about inadequate oversight and enforcement tools. There doesn't seem to be a relationship between project size or cost or complexity and the way that it's overseen by regulators. And indeed, often enforcement doesn't actually happen. I can remember sitting in on conversations with regulators who were willing to admit that if it was going to be expensive to undertake enforcement action, local authorities were not keen to do that. Not least because if they did, and if they were successful, the penalties would be trivial in comparison to the costs of pursuing that action. And that's clearly a situation that has to change, and under the new legislation will change. So it's important to say that the government has accepted all of Dame Judith's findings. Now, that is unusual. Often governments will take a report and will accept some of the findings, and they'll put some caveats. On this one, the government has said that they are accepting all of the findings, lock, stock, and barrel. So we need to be clear on that. And they've identified a number of things that are going ahead. We're talking about the Building Safety Bill and the regulator now. I'm sure people are aware of the Fire Safety Bill, which has caught some headlines in the last 24 hours. And I'm not going to cover that because it's a separate piece of legislation. We're aware that government is setting up a new regime for construction product safety and approvals. And perhaps that has been accelerated by some of the revelations at the Grenfell Tower inquiry. And there's also work already underway to develop a new competence framework for all in the industry. And alongside all of that, there is a clear demand for a radical change of culture from within the industry. The first items on the list can largely be legislated for or new arrangements brought in to administer. Culture change is a bit different, and it really affects all of us. But I'm going to talk about the bill first and what government is doing, and then we'll turn to think for a few minutes about what we can do and what we can do now. So this slide just gives you the current status of the bill. It's currently been for pre-legislative scrutiny. That's where a draft goes to the relevant select committee. In this case, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. They have had hearings. They've now produced a report which has gone back to government and been published. And we're now waiting for the bill to come out. My best guess at the moment, and it is no more than a best guess, is that that will be in May. And in addition to the bill itself, there will be secondary legislation, regulations that will bring in a lot of the detail. So the first hint is, don't expect all the detail in the bill. One of the real problems with the current Building Act is that there's so much detail in the Act, and you can't change an Act without more primary legislation. So for 35 years, we've worked under the Building Act, and even when it has been felt that it would be good to change something, it's not happened because it's not been possible to get parliamentary time. So this time around, there will be less detail in the bill, I think, and we will see more secondary legislation that can be altered if and when it becomes clear that that needs to happen. So moving quickly on, what does the Building Safety Bill hold for us? Well, it's not yet published, but we've seen the draft and we've seen some of the commitments. We know there's going to be a new building safety regulator operating within the HSE. And we know that they're going to take responsibility for building control from the local authorities. And that includes setting standards for building control officers and responsibility for enforcement. And there are potential criminal sanctions in the worst cases. The building safety regulator is going to be responsible for building regulations for all buildings. Now, I really do want to try and be clear on this because I sense there's confusion. The building safety regulator is not just being created to deal with high-rise residential buildings. It's taking over the whole thing. So everything that comes under the scope of building regs will be the responsibility of the regulator. For high-rise buildings, there will be additional requirements, and I'll come to them in a minute. The regulator is also setting up new competence requirements, and again, these apply to everything. Now, the bit where there's extra, there's going to be a new safety case-based regime, which will initially be for high-rise residential buildings. Now, these are sometimes being referred to as buildings in scope. And we need to be clear, that's in scope of the safety case regime, not in scope of the legislation. Because I hope I've just explained, everything is in scope of the legislation. Why are we doing that? Because again, it comes back to the difference between primary and secondary legislation. The Act is not going to define the buildings that come within the stricter regime. That will go into secondary legislation. And it's initially going to be buildings over 18 metres and 6 stories, but there's a very clear mechanism in there for that to be extended in the future. So that's the position. The Act, the regulator apply to everything. The safety case regime for high-rise residential buildings, that's the more limited bit, which will apply to probably 500 or 600 new buildings a year and about 12,000 overall. So moving swiftly on to allow some time for questions and discussion. The bill will also establish the golden thread of information. Now, that's primarily for buildings in scope, but there will be things there that others may want to pick up and apply. And there are going to be new duty holder roles and regulatory gateways, which will apply again across the board, and will mean that there are some clear hard stops in there, where if things are not done, buildings will not be occupied. Now, it's only going to take 1 or 2 quite expensive buildings not being allowed to open for a couple of months, and I hope people will begin to get the message. It'd be really good if people got the message without that, but I'm not convinced it'll work that way. So what needs to change? Well, I think there's going to have to be a change of attitudes, that the regime is tightening and we are going to have to get used to that. We're not going to see this off. This isn't going to be like many of the reports over the whole of my lifetime, really. We've gone through, there was Banwell in the 60s, there was Latham in the early 90s. A lot of that was picked up, but not all. There was there was Egan, and I think he had 2 reports. Paul Morell had a go, Andrew Wolstenholme had a go, Mark Farmer's had a go recently. And there's a feeling that the industry has thought, well, if we get our heads down, in 2 or 3 years' time, this will go away. It's not going to go away this time. The Building Safety Bill is not going to be seen off by ignoring it and keeping your head down. We're going to have to engage with this, and we're going to have to change our approach. We're going to have to change our practices. And an area where I think our sector needs to think hard about what we can be doing now is around competence. Are the people that we've got doing work fully competent? Are they really as well trained as they could be? If they're on a register, whether it's a professional register like chartered engineer, or it's a register for particular skills, are those people doing proper professional or ongoing development and training and keeping their skills up to date? These are all things we can be working on today, not waiting for a new piece of legislation. There may be some work needed on business models. Now, this isn't entirely down to us. There are others who may need to work on that. We know that there's going to be a change of approach to compliance. Are we ready for it? Are we preparing for it? And we'd like to see some change to procurement, starting with government. The good news is there was a consultation that closed a couple of weeks ago, which gave us an opportunity to explain to government where it could change the procurement regime to positively encourage a better approach to safety and even to net zero carbon. And then we do need to see a change of culture. And I'm just going to give 4 quick examples before I conclude. So we've known that there's a gap between how buildings use energy and how they were expected to use energy for well over a decade. The inquiry has shown the gulf between what could and should have been done and what was done in relation to fire safety. And the pandemic has exposed concerns about ventilation, and that's come up already. The fact that we've had to work so hard to provide guidance on ventilation just demonstrates the failings there. And in Scotland, there were a couple of serious collapses, structural collapses of school buildings. Thankfully, the playgrounds were empty at the time and we didn't have any fatalities. But the blunt truth is we were lucky and we got away with it. We simply have to change the way that we work and build if we are going to prevent that awful picture from earlier being repeated one day somewhere. And the pressure is on us not just to deliver on building safety, we've got to cope with digitalisation, modern methods of construction and net zero buildings. We see the UK BIM framework coming in, and that's now firmly referenced in the government's construction playbook. And there's also a lot of work around Digital Built Britain to digitise the way that the built environment is built and operated. And I think we're all familiar with the net zero targets and challenges, and I don't need to dwell on them. I'm going to finish with one of Dame Judith's comments. I'm not going to read it all to you, but when somebody of that experience who'd run the health and safety executive for a number of years says that she was shocked by some of the practices that she heard about, I think we do have to stop and ask ourselves what's going on and what are we doing to try and change it. It's not somebody else's job to change it. We need to look at it for ourselves and ask, what can we do to change? Changes to the regulatory regime will help, but again, we need to be doing things ourselves. We need to be taking ownership, and we need to be looking at what we can do ourselves and in our businesses and in our organisations to be ready so that when the Building Safety Act reaches the statute books, we're not sitting there saying, oh, we need a bit of time to get ready for this now. That time's already started, and we ought to be getting ready before it comes to the statute book. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for listening, and back to Andrew for some questions, I think.
Yes, we've got just enough time for 1 or 2 questions, Hal, but you'll be coming back to to help us with the fire safety debate. So we won't talk about that at the moment. I'm going to ask you just a couple of general questions. Existing buildings, is that part of the scope of the building safety regulator, or is it wholly new buildings at the moment?
Thank you, Andrew. That's a really good question, and I get a minus mark for not making that clear in the talk. Absolutely. For the buildings over 18 metres or 6 stories, they are in scope, and that means there are about 11,500 existing high-rise residential buildings that will need a safety case. Now, I don't know how many people who are listening in today are involved in that sort of work, but that's very definitely something people can be starting to do now. And the big housing associations are already hard at work behind the scenes.
Okay, thanks. This is just sort of a general question. What do you think the hardest part of this new regime to apply will be? And that may or may not be the same question as what is the key application for the building services and HVAC sector, in your opinion?
I think they might be the same. I mean, the truth of the matter is we're looking to change an industry that employs the thick end of 3 million people. That is a massive challenge to change the way people think. And for those who've spent 20 or 30 years in the industry doing things the way that they've been done for the last 20 or 30 years, it's asking people to sign up to some big changes. And some of the changes that are being asked for are going to be difficult. Saying, I'm not prepared to carry on this project because I don't think that if we do it this way, it will be safe, it's not in how to win friends and influence people. It is how to change the industry, but it's going to be tough. And it's going to require businesses to support people who say, there's something that's not right here, we need to do this differently. And not tell them, if you won't do it that way, I'll find somebody else who will. So it's going to involve some serious changes and people being prepared to take a deep breath and say, I will put safety ahead of money. That's a tough ask.
And not one that the industry has been terribly good at over the years.
No, but and that's why, and I appreciate that's a shocking picture, but if we don't get this right, then that is what we face happening again.
Okay, I've got a question come in now, which is an interesting one. Mainly it's interesting because we wrote about it. So the new regulator, Peter Baker, has said that when safety is embedded, as far as his scope is concerned, he'll be looking at issues of efficiency, energy efficiency, as kind of a second stage. What do you think about that? And is there any idea of what that might mean? That's quite a big question, isn't it? Sorry, Hal.
That's a huge question, and I haven't got time to give it the kind of answer it really needs. But I mean, I've got huge admiration for Peter Baker. I don't know him very well. I have met him, but he's taking on an absolutely enormous responsibility, and he's putting safety first. The one thing that he would be utterly pilloried for is if there was another episode like Grenfell. So I quite understand why he wants to sort that out first. It's not as if we're going to do safety and we won't worry about energy efficiency for a few years while we do that. But I can quite understand why safety has to be the top priority. I happen to think that if we start trying to deal with safety properly, we might do a bit better on some of the energy efficiency issues at the same time. So, it's not either or. But keeping people alive has to be Peter Baker's first priority, and I'm sure that's why he's taken the line that he has.
Yeah, it's either that or the cynic's view is that he's got power in his eyes and that he wants to take energy on once he's done safety. But that just may be a cynical journalist. So I've got one more question for you as the clock ticks towards 1/4 past. And that is around the idea that the government is just paying lip service. And I'll tell you why people are saying that. It's because the idea of developers picking up the tab for post-Grenfell measures is being bounced around Parliament at the moment like a ping pong ball. So what do you say to that, Hal? It's the government says talks a good game, but then when it comes to actually paying for these changes and forcing these changes, they don't want to know.
I'm going to play a little bit of ping pong back with you, Andrew, because I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I mean, you know, there's a huge debate going on around the costs of historic defects. And I did say earlier that really is currently being played out around the fire safety bill. When you look at what's in the building safety bill, there are really significant changes in there. They don't look like lip service to me. I believe at the last count there were a couple of hundred civil servants in MHCLG working on the bill and related topics. That doesn't look like the activity of a government that doesn't intend to push this legislation through and make it stick. So I'm afraid I am a bit of an optimist, and I also think that on this particular issue, government knows it's got to deliver reform of the current system.
Thank you, Hal. There's no shame in being an optimist. There are a few in this industry, I think. So we'll see you in a few minutes. But for now, thank you for that. And I'm going to expect Neil to pop up to introduce our next speaker. There he is. So I'm going to fade away again. Over to you, Neil.
Okay, hopefully we're getting better at this time, if nothing else. Okay, so thanks again, Andrew. You've got me for one more time this afternoon, but not for too long. I promise. I'm going to be handing over to Becky Crossland, who heads up health and safety for BISA, which would give her plenty to deal with any normal year, as we know. But obviously, it hasn't been anything quite like that with COVID. But I think we'll start. I'll just be handing over now to Becky, perhaps to tell us a bit more about what the pandemic has meant and could yet mean for life on sites and industry work as a whole. So, Becky, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see that now.
Yep, that looks.
So hopefully you can see that. Yep.
We can see that.
So Becky, thank you everybody for it.
Oh, sorry. Just
thank you everybody.
That's it. You got it.
Yeah, is it okay? Thank you everybody for attending today. This is just a quick health and safety COVID-19 site update. So what's been happening and what we've got to look forward to in the future. So moving forward, we do have the R number going down in most areas. In some areas we're seeing certain spikes, but it's pretty good news. It means that what we've been doing so far is working. So the current ART numbers are in the UK between 0.6 and 0.8. Scotland is 0.7 to 1. Wales is 0.6 to 0.8. And Northern Ireland is 0.9 to 1.1. And these numbers are so much better than they were before. But it's really, really important as we see the R number drop that we still follow the protocol that we need to follow. We've got a new variant to worry about. It's called P1 and it's a branch of the B1128 lineage. It's something that people are worried about and officials are looking very closely into this because it shares similar mutations and changes to the South African variant. They've undergone genetic changes that makes them less likely to be sort of got rid of with the current vaccines. However, they are currently looking at the P1 variant and how they can just tweak the vaccination. But to avoid further lockdown in the summer, it is vital that everybody keeps the healthy coronavirus protocol to protect yourselves and also everybody else, and that's work colleagues and also family and friends. This is an interesting diagram because it shows that if one person has the virus, then how it can very quickly spread. And this is what we've had before. We've had successive outbreaks. Now, the newspapers are warning of a new outbreak, and if we don't all behave ourselves, that may happen. We have a situation at the moment where many people have been vaccinated, but the under 50s are still out there with no vaccinations. And as I said, we have the new variant of the virus to worry about as well. Mitigating measures, things you can do on site. We know if you're further away from someone, there's less risk of catching the virus because it's from droplets. So if you look at staying further away from people, the 2 meters, but duration, the longer the time that you're actually in an enclosed area with somebody, the higher the risk will be. Fresh air, the risk is lower if you're outdoors or in a well-ventilated area. So you need to start thinking about ventilation in rooms, but also think about staircases and corridors on site. Those areas where there's stagnant air can be higher risk. So think about how you can deliver fresh air to those areas as well. Direction, if you're obviously not face-to-face with someone, the risk is lower. And also the task, it depends on what people are doing. If somebody's sitting down, they're going to be expelling less droplets than if they're doing a manual handling task, for instance. So all those things need to be considered. And it's another really good diagram, shows you how far the bigger droplets will drop at about 1 meter, but those smaller droplets, they're still looking at how far they go. And we have the new P1 variant, and again, they're still studying this new variant, so keep 2 meters apart. And I think it's really vital that you look at what those people are going to be doing on site and also do a risk assessment. The healthy coronavirus protocol is, everybody knows it now, clean your hands, make sure you stay 2 meters apart. The obvious, stay at home if you're sick and get tested. Even if you don't think it's coronavirus, it may very well be that. So it doesn't take that long to get a test. Avoid close contact with anybody that's not well, coughing or sneezing, and wear a well-fitting, high-quality face covering. When your turn comes, get vaccinated. I had the AstraZeneca vaccination at the weekend, and I'm totally fine. And it was a very, very quick process as well, just like the flu vaccine, really. If you have been vaccinated, just a word of warning, if you live with a chronic health condition yourself, or you live with somebody that does have one, it really is even more important, especially in the next couple of months, to follow the coronavirus secure safety guidelines, because obviously you don't want to transmit the coronavirus to anyone. When we're looking at face coverings and visors, face shields, just be careful. They're very effective. They protect your eyes, but if they're not shaped correctly, bigger droplets can go underneath those visors. So ideally, you need to be wearing a face covering with the visor if they're used on their own. If somebody can't wear a face covering for medical reasons, then absolutely they should be wearing a visor instead. But just bear that in mind. With face coverings, they're effective at catching the larger droplets of the virus, and your face covering protects everyone else. But we're still looking at those smaller droplets. And if the virus is proved to be spreading via the tiny droplets, you need to have a good quality face covering on, one that's made up of at least 3 layers. And obviously the effectiveness of that covering is going to depend on what material it's made out of. With employers, if you're asking people to wear face coverings, if you're allowing them to wear their own, make sure that they are washing them and they are keeping them clean as well, because it's really vital to stop transmission of coronavirus. And remember, if your eyes are not protected if you're wearing a face covering, only your mouth. So if somebody coughs directly at you, there is a small chance you could get coronavirus that way. Double masking, just be careful. If you put the other mask on top of the one that you're already wearing, it can increase the gaps in the side, and this can allow the air that you're breathing in and out to go through the gaps that might be present. And obviously that defeats the object of the face covering in the first place. The wearing of 2 face coverings is probably great now, but in the summer, I can't see people wearing 1, let alone 2. So it's going to become very uncomfortable. And I think the closer to the summer and the warmer weather we get, that will become very evident. Just be careful of breathability as well. Make sure you can still breathe. When you layer face coverings, people could get hot and uncomfortable, and that causes them to move them and touch their face. And there's a higher risk, obviously, that they can get infected. If basically the face covering loses effectiveness because of any of these reasons, overheating, poor breathability, or carbon dioxide retention problems, then clearly they're not going to work. Anybody with breathing issues, again, be very careful with double masking because it can affect the carbon dioxide within the mask. It is better just to have a good quality face covering. With the 2 metre social distancing guidelines, we know that the R rate has dropped, which is really, really good news. But evidence shows that you've got a 2 to 10 times higher risk at 1 metre without mitigation measures, so face covering and so on. And we don't know how much further this has been increased with the new variant P1. So current NHS guidance recommends that due to the high transmission rates of the B117, that we all stay 2 metres apart, not the 1+ metre as stated by some organisations and on some news programmes I've seen. With lateral flow testing, it's available now for sites and individuals. If you've got under 50 employees, you'll be controlled by your local authority. If it's over 50 employees, you'll be helped by the NHS, and single contractors can actually get a test from their local authority. Testing is free till June 21, but if you're an employer who wants to do testing, then you need to sign up before the 31st of March, which I do believe is next Wednesday, so that you can get that testing done. There are some issues with lateral flow testing. It's not mandatory, so it could be difficult if somebody doesn't want to be tested. Your test result will not travel with you, so you might need to be tested on different sites depending on how your work is managed. You need to think about a policy now for your employer, and you need to look at communicating that policy to workers to get their buy-in to that. There could also be issues with self-isolation. The more people that get identified, the people close to them will be asked to self-isolate as well. Common problems are that people, single contractors need to earn money, but it's worth remembering that if you are identified as being positive, it's a legal requirement to self-isolate. There is reported complacency on site by workers that have already been tested. If you've had a lateral flow test or anything else for that matter, you still need to follow all the protocol. Vaccinations, it doesn't make you immune from getting it or actually transmitting it either. So really, really important. With people that don't want to be tested, it's a good idea to sit down and have a chat with them about why, rather than start quoting the Health and Safety at Work Act and things. There may be valid reasons why people don't want to be tested, but they still need to be encouraged to follow that healthy coronavirus protocol. Lateral flow testing. So if you've had a positive COVID-19 PCR result in the last 3 months, so if you've had COVID, you should not be doing lateral flow tests. It's because basically that test will probably give a false positive result. And this is because once a person's been tested positive for coronavirus, they begin to develop antibodies. And for up to 90 days following a positive test, any old cells of the virus can be present. And that the lateral flow test may pick up those odd cells and obviously bring up a positive result when the person has been fully recovered. So there is more information about that on the NHS website for anybody that's interested. Where you've got to travel, regular toolbox talks outlining how to reduce the possibility of transmission and infection. If you are travelling in or near London, Transport for London has published a toolkit, and I've put a link to that at the end of this set of slides. I will share with anybody. But it gives some specific advice about problem areas across London. Try and encourage, if you can, workers to walk or cycle to work, or consider changing your operating hours. Shifts starting and finishing around the sort of the busiest times, try and allocate those if you can to workers who can walk or cycle to work. And obviously sharing with workers any specific travel advice. And this goes for any main city, it's not just London. As we all start going back to work, we still want to keep to that 2 metre distance if we can. Ensure that you're aware of all local authority restrictions and any other lockdowns. As we move out of this lockdown, I think it's going to become evident that some areas will have their own lockdown procedures, depending on what that R number does and depending on where it goes up or down. So we need to comply with that moving forward as well. This is just a diagram to show you that when you travel together with somebody, if you look at the airflow inside the car here, you can see it goes between all 4 occupants, and you can see somebody that's infected sneezing, the whole of the car is going to be infected with that. And basically, that's why people don't want you to travel together. If you have to travel together, because there will be situations, there are things that you need to do. Looking at if you've got people from different households sharing for work purposes, try and keep them together. Look at how you can physical distance people in the car. If it's not possible to have the right amount of distance, then obviously you need to start thinking about face coverings, face visors, limit the amount of passengers in each vehicle, and keep groups, as I said before, travelling in the same sort of bubble, if you like. Consider there may be other cross-border local authority restrictions moving forward. It depends on where you're going, so always check out your local authority website to see what they're doing. Domestic workers, if you're going out into customers' homes, again, the risk is really high. You need to start thinking about how customers are going to increase your COVID-19 risk. Does your customer know what to expect when you call? Have you asked them to open doors and windows so that the area is aerated, but also that you don't have to touch any doors as you go through the property? Find out, are they going to follow the social distancing guidelines? A lot of property owners are nervous about leaving somebody in a room on their own, but at the moment it's vitally important. With customer behaviour as well, I think customers like better to know what's going to happen before you turn up. So really, really important. If you are in Scotland at the moment, work in people's homes is not allowed unless it's essential works, and I do believe that's until the 26th of April. So only essential works can be completed in people's homes at the moment in Scotland. But do make sure you do it safely, and just make sure both parties are aware of what's happening. If you're travelling from house to house as well, any workers out there, just be aware that you need to be extra careful because you don't want to be spreading anything from customer to customer. Do you have a procedure to follow if the customer won't actually follow what you're supposed to be asking them to do? The procedure would be that you would leave the property until they decided to comply. But there's all those things to think about. And obviously at the start of the pandemic, the R number was highest in people's homes. So domestic workers need to be very careful moving forward. So site safety, every site's going to be different depending on the size, the layout of that site, and the number of workers going on, and what work they're doing as well. There is no 15-minute rule. If you've got to go closer to anybody, then you need to be doing a risk assessment. At the moment, we need to pay close attention to worker behaviour, making sure workers aren't getting complacent, and also making sure that if they've been laterally flow tested or had a vaccination, that they still keep to those coronavirus protocols. Check with a site manager or principal contractor what the local COVID-19 controls are before you get there, ideally, and then you know what to expect when you turn up on site. The health and safety doing spot checks of businesses everywhere. And you might get visited by contractors working on behalf of the HSE, and I've put a link there for you. They will have to have appropriate ID and a letter, and they should also ask for somebody in authority on the site before they start the inspection. There is a really handy checklist of what to expect on the inspection on the CICV forum website, which I've put a link to at the end of this presentation. Don't forget other hazards and risks, they're all still out there. Work fatigue is coming one quite high up on the list, along with home working and also working at high and stress. Home working, there's a really good checklist on the CICV forum website that can be used anywhere, and it just assures you that you are checking that your home workers, if they are still working from home, are doing it safely. Personal behaviour, be like Campbell, CICV forum, are you COVID secure? What's your personal behaviour? What you're doing when you're not at work could have a massive impact on your work colleagues and also your family. So be COVID-19 smart and avoid the spread of COVID altogether. So social distancing rules in your free time as well as at work. It's not going to be forever. I know it's difficult, but if we do this, we can actually break the chain and the cycle of this virus. Things I'm worried about moving forward are social distancing. People are already starting to stop doing that. Travel, people traveling together. We've seen too many vans with 3 people up in the front seat. Workers that go out to people's homes, so domestic workers, do a risk assessment, make sure that they're safe. Worker behaviour, personal behaviour outside work as well, but also Legionella as buildings open up and sites open up. Different offices, different things will be used. So they're the things that I'm going to be concentrating on. Key messages are you need to provide evidence to show that work can be completed safely without risks to workers. And as such, when we're looking at COVID-19, we need to do a risk assessment and look at all those hazards and risks and obviously put in the appropriate control measures so that worker isn't affected by COVID. There are some useful web addresses here, useful links, sorry. We've got the BISA COVID-19 guidance, and there's some really good guidance notes on their risk assessments as well, and they're all available to everybody, not just BISA members. I've put the HSE website on there and also the UK government COVID-19 guidance and support page. Check out the CICV forum website. A lot of the documents on there can be utilised for all across the country, they're not just for Scotland. We also have the BISA Academy, where you can take your online environmental health and safety test online. And there's also a free COVID-19 site test that you can do to prove that your workers are COVID secure. And then we have the Transport for London link and also BSIF, so that's the British Safety Industry Federation. Really good place, really useful advice on PPE and also anything to do with Brexit moving forward. Where can we get our number information? These are all the web addresses where you can find out what is happening in your area and what the R number is moving forward. And just remember to check the local authority website for the area you're travelling to. As we start opening up, there will be different rules depending on where you're going. And that's me.
Lovely, thanks, Rebecca. Hopefully that's kicked back in, but that's given us plenty of points to talk. You must be able to pretty much recite all that by muscle memory and reflex. But
I can, yeah.
I was going to ask a few questions actually here. Interestingly, some of the responses we've seen, I know a few months back and during the lockdowns, there was a lot of construction was quite under watch, and there was a lot of hard talk from ministers about construction being left open with some of the issues we were seeing with our numbers on the rise. I was wondering, since we've sort of seen that, your experience from and feedback you've got about how do you feel that workers on sites have taken to some of the stronger messages on controls, and has there been some resistance to this or an acceptance really that this is, you know, the harder ways of working are what it's going to be to prevent what we saw when we didn't have that much knowledge or information at the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think construction as a whole has done an amazingly good job. In England, they've certainly worked all the way through, and Scotland have opened up gradually, but the rate of transmission remains relatively low throughout construction. So I think they've done a really good job. I think people get used to things very quickly, and I think people get resigned. When you're looking at is this going to be a future way of working, I think it is, and I think lateral flow testing will become like brushing your teeth. It'll be one of those things you do before you leave the house. So yeah, I think the one thing to point out is how well construction have done to actually implement all of the different changes that have gone on, because we've had the SOP changed. I think we're on version 6 now, and each time they've readily accepted what they need to do. So yeah, I think they've accepted it moving forward.
I suppose it's avoiding that point of having to get government sort of cracking down as well. I mean, it hasn't been talked, I don't think, as much since then. I know, following a lot of your briefings, we were talking earlier in the year and then late last year about the HSE inspections, and the HSE was being seen as taking quite an active role to make sure sites were complying. I was wondering, from your experience, did that in the end come to sort of fruition, and what was the impact? I mean, is it fair to say that that may have done good, or may have sort of focused the industry minds a little bit? Where
I think people expected the HSE a lot sooner than they actually turned up, to be honest. But I think it's a good thing for the industry, because obviously they know that they're going to be looked at via an official body. But I think it also provides reassurance to workers as well. We're not, in some cases, actually getting health and safety inspectors. They are people that have been employed by the HSE to help them, if you like, because of the numbers. But over the general course of inspections, most of them have just resulted in the HSE giving advice. But in some cases, they have had to resort to more firmer measures in relation to the inspections, depending on what they find.
I was going to ask the other question, not least peppering you with questions myself over the last year, and for BISA as well. But I wonder what the main sort of areas or concerns and questions you've been getting from industry in regards to site safety, and how is there any sort of pattern of how that maybe has changed as the pandemic's progressed, as our expectations, as our kind of knowledge has changed as well?
Yeah, I think at the beginning I got an awful lot of questions about face coverings and social distancing, which still remain. We don't get so much about face coverings now, because again, that's another control measure that's just been accepted. But certainly social distancing still in the forum, simply because when people go to work, they just simply forget. If you're doing a job, it's very, very difficult to tell yourself 25 times a minute not to go closer than 2 meters to somebody. Yes, of course, you could provide systems where they buzz if you do go closer than 2 meters. But quite frankly, I think that would completely annoy everybody. So I think it's really difficult in the terms of that. But I think as we've moved forward, I've definitely seen a lot more acceptance, but a lot more working together as well, with different factions, different associations and federations, and also more sort of correlation between the HSE government and the construction groups, which is really encouraging to see as well.
Yeah, I mean, because I was interested how this develops in the longer term. I was wondering, from as we can see it right now, are we basically looking at this will perhaps be the way working on site will be until we get the mass vaccinations in and there's some sort of proof of that coming back? Or in the longer term, does social distancing, does this stay for 2 years, perhaps out of safety, for 3 years? Is there a behavioural change and a longer term we see? Or I guess it's kind of not just construction, it's tied to the wider issue then of going back to work.
Yeah, I don't think that's a question that anybody can answer at the moment. Certainly at the moment, we need to keep to the 2 meter distance and wear the face coverings. Moving forward, as we go out of the lockdown, it's vitally important we keep doing that. Depending on what variants we get pop up, and depending on how quickly the scientists can look at controls for those, I would say pretty much for the next year, I would say yes. We've heard this morning as well on the news that it will be illegal to travel from next week, and they're not going to review that until the 31st of June. So again, they're doing everything they can to stop this P1 and to stop any overlap from the third strain of, the third rush of the virus in Europe getting to the UK. So I think people will be disappointed, and I think people are getting really sick of all this social distancing and isolation. But it's either that or die. And when I talk about lateral flow testing and people refusing lateral flow testing, again, it's a way of saying to the employee, well, if you get a hard hat because your employer doesn't want you to get your head smashed in from a brick, lateral flow testing is exactly the same thing. It's just another control to make sure that you're safe, but also that everybody else is safe. So I think we've all got to keep moving forward, keep working together. And I do hope that everybody, all these correlations we've got together during COVID continue long past COVID. There's some really good, amazing industry professionals that have got together and produced some really good advice.
I guess there's a lot of peace of mind that comes with lateral flow tests as well. I know we've talked in the past about COVID secure and COVID safe, and the idea is probably more COVID safe is quite a strong word, whereas COVID secure is about taking those measures and making sure that at the very least you're mitigating the risks for people where it be there. The other question, I know you mentioned PPE's become less of a concern. Again, we've got more knowledge on that and what our expectations are. But in terms of sort of some of the basic kit and the requirements that have been needed there, I was wondering, is there any concerns about the support and the industry's ability to take on a lot of these measures in terms of, is that something that's just naturally has to come from industry itself, or is this something where there's been perhaps calls for support, or there has been support from government and others to kind of try and help ensure that sites can accommodate and be more active?
I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a bit of a problem with RPE and obviously face coverings, completely different thing altogether. And obviously with the first rush and the government having a problem with their supply, there was a slight shortage. But as of now, I mean, it's industry led. If the industry need RPE or PPE for that particular task, then they're encouraged still to use it. What isn't effective is to wear RPE for COVID-19, unless, of course, you're working in close proximity. That could mean that workers that are going into a care home or working indeed for a hospital may need to wear full RPE because of the COVID risk. But you should be guided by the institution you're going to and what their recommendations are. But for normal site working, face coverings are fine.
Brilliant. And thanks again, Becky. I think we've come pretty much to the end of time on that one. There's always a bit more with these things, so I suddenly think of questions and the audience kick in. But again, thanks for comprehensively. That's been really useful, particularly where we've come from at the beginning of the year, back in March a year ago, where we just didn't know and ringing around frantically, an idea of what this meant. To have the knowledge we got is really appreciated. So it's fantastic, and thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Lovely. And I'll go back over to Andrew now for the final plan.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Becky. Very interesting as we move into this final session, what Becky was saying about changing the culture on site, and culture is very much part of the future building safety regime that we need to change. This session is about fire safety, and we have a reasonably long time to discuss this, but when we prepared this panel session, we realized we have an awful lot of things to talk about. So we're going to try and present this in a very structured form, and if it isn't, it's all my fault. But there's experts from all over the industry here in front of me, and what I'm going to do to kick things off is get them to introduce themselves and their specialist subject, a bit like Fire Safety Mastermind, and talk a little bit around their subject. So we're going to start with Steve. Steve is our man on the ground, man at the sharp end, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what he sees about compliance on site, and I should imagine non-compliance too. So take the floor, Steve.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, I've been in the industry for, well, probably over 45 years now, and learned my industry through other professionals, shall we say. There wasn't apprenticeships at the time when I was a kid. I just started one. But it's like when they built, for instance, like Manhattan or New York, whatever. They didn't probably even have a spirit level, but the drains are still working. You know, buildings are still standing. I go and look at schools that are 40, 50 years old. Perfect. Nothing wrong with them. Would I check the fire stopping? I can. But you're not really going to find much of a problem with them because they was built correctly. They was built right. They was built to bare standards as well. So, you know, what would you like me to experience on anything in particular other than competence?
I think what I would like is for you to give us an example of a couple of the things that you were saying about how fire stopping in practice is not really happening in the way that it should these days, and where it's come from. Tell us about what used to happen and about what you think happens now.
Well, I thought myself when King's Cross disaster happened, I thought the industry would have had a real push, but it didn't. It slightly did on the underground, but for certain parties. But in general, no, it stayed dormant. after the bombing in '91. I thought we would have pushed it then. Very, very in its infancy. Nothing happened. However, I guess about 5 years ago now, we started getting an influx from Europe. And training was hard, and it is hard. Because it's overseas training, they have to speak English first, right? So we've trained them on. Since then, it has increased. The FPA have got their own system, which is quite good. But it's not strict enough for training in all areas of fire stopping and compartmentation, which I suppose could lead me on to another way, shall we say. I was listening to your Neil Merry earlier in regards to ventilation, air conditioning, etc., which is a really good idea for me to start from in schools. Now, the lack of competence was by the roofers back in the year 2000. I believe we had a Labour government in 2000 to 2004, and then Gove stepped in. He accelerated the programme for the schools. This is a classic example. So once you start accelerating programs, you start accelerating bad workmanship. Now, as you can see from this one, Corrie Sill. Now, in the roof systems on schools, there are trapezoidal infills. The trapezoidals are laid across the means of escape. This stops the smoke jumping over the firewall directly into means of escape. Now, I know of so many schools which I've been to and visited, and there are no smoke stoppers. Now, this is a latent defect, there's no doubt about it. So all the manufacturers recommend you install them. I have looked 60, 70, 80 of them. I'm not sure, I've lost count. There is not one school anywhere with a smoke stopper. Now, that's bad workmanship. Now, they've been putting this in since the year 2000, and they probably still are. So, hence Corrie Sill was born. It was born out of necessity, not a luxury, because we need to seal the means of escape. So then we moved on. I was listening to Nathan Wood and Gary Ratcliffe in regard to his schools. I wrote it down earlier. It was a really interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it, I must be honest with you. And we're talking about ventilation and compartmentation for the ventilation. Because let's be honest, without compartmentation, how can you air vent? You need it sealed. So we've done tests in-house with stoppers and without the stoppers. With the stoppers in, that we've managed to squeeze in, like another company have, and then we blasted smoke into the corridors, we saved 10 seconds. So we can actually fill a corridor within 30 seconds of a school corridor. But again, it's all on the Corrie Sill website anyway. It's corrie-sill.co.uk. But it gives you a good idea of bad workmanship, latent defects, all rolled up in one. Yeah, it's worth a go.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great introduction. Thanks, Steve. So that sets the scene for some of the lack of fire stopping going on the site. So I can segue nicely into introducing Peter, because Peter with BESA and ASFP have produced a guide about fire stopping. And I guess for the audience's benefit, I want to ask what exactly how did that come about? What, apart from the fact that clearly on site it's not really happening, but tell us a bit about the genesis, Peter.
Yeah, well, I think good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I think you're right. Everybody was seeing sites being built, bad examples of fire stopping, installation of fire dampers, and I think the industry felt that this document was obviously needed to pull things together. Obviously, Grenfell would have contributed to that as well. So together with AFSP, as you say, BISRIA, FIS, we decided to get together and come up with a new fire penetration seal document, which is free to everybody to access, which is good as well. So they don't have to pay to see what they've got to do. Although the fire stopping might seem to be a fairly small part of the structure of the wall, it's actually probably the most important part to get the actual fire penetration seal done correctly is really totally important. So we've come up with the guide. A lot of work between lots of organisations, and I think the information is obviously very good. It's very simple to understand and follow, and it gives lots of good guidance. The main target audience, I suppose, that we're looking at is all designers, architects, the fire service, the consultants. We're looking at the installers, the main contractors, principal contractors, the mechanical contractors, the inspectors, building regs, fire and rescue authorities, insurers, and obviously the end clients as well. The end clients are going to want to know what their building is actually like. And why do we need the guide? Well, as we said, we think, as Steve was saying, you know, I've been in the industry like he has since a boy, and there is a lack of awareness, I think, of what's actually happening out there. There are lots of bad practices which we need to get to grips with, and we need to sort these supports and penetration seals out properly. The guidance will help sort of show you that. So that's really what we came from. Some of the biggest problems are the standard project. They're all different. Every project is different. So every hole through a wall is different. So you need to get this sort of fairly standardized, if you can, sort of penetration into the actual walls and seals. And this document will help people actually understand that, I think. And we do need a change. Again, as Steve mentioned earlier, but I think we all agree, and your whole summit today has been about competency, and people we do need more education. We do need early engagement on projects to make sure we get all these things right. And I think that's really where we come from with this particular document. We've got a good case study in there as well for people to go through. I hope, and I think they're finding that the document is very, very useful. I think we've had about 20,000 copies actually been issued at the moment. So it's obviously been taken up very well. So that's where we are with it at the moment.
Thanks, Peter. I mean, I think just the list of potential readers, it goes a long way to demonstrating the number of stakeholders that are involved in fire safety and should be involved. And yeah, I think probably we'll get into a bit of a debate later about to what extent they are already involved and what else we can do about it. But one of the key elements in that supply chain is the manufacturer. So it's almost as if I'd written this down as a structure beforehand. I'm going to move smoothly on to Andrew from Swagon, who's going to talk a little bit about the manufacturer's perspective.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so from our perspective, and I think Peter touched on it there, is early engagement is one of the big key elements for us. I think on several fronts really, in the design process, obviously in the very beginning, but in terms of selecting the correct product, what gets specified, and then particularly the installation method. So how we've tested and installed the product in a test is how the product should be installed on site. And really it's that early engagement for the contractors to understand that that's the process, that's what they need to install it in that method. And certainly for us, yeah, we spend an awful lot of time training contractors and consultants and others. I think we trained over 2,500 people last year. So we're passionate about getting that message across to the industry, because yeah, that's the only way it's going to be delivered correctly if people follow those tested methods. So that's really key for us. And sort of moving back slightly from that, I think one of the things that we always find as a bit of an issue really is that the specification of the product is not just dependent on the wall or the wall type, it's the system as a whole. And I think that often gets overlooked. So where we're involved in control systems and the whole system approach, I think that's a key element to ensure that the individual components can deliver the strategy for the building. So, and that often gets overlooked because it's someone looking at a damper in isolation, for example, rather than the system as a whole. So that's one of our particular issues, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. We'll come back to a discussion about early engagement, I think, in a minute. But passing over to Howell, fresh from his talk about the forthcoming building safety bill and the regulator, but also I guess this is a good place to drop in the fire safety bill and how that interacts with everything we've been talking about.
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I think on the fire safety bill, the big thing there is that it's aimed at making it clear that facades are part of the common parts and fire doors. So that's the big deal there. The thing I just want to pick up on is that the health and safety people are likely to be looking quite hard at fire stopping. Because if you're going to have a safety case for a building, one of the things you want to know is that the fire stopping is there. And if somebody like Steve can go to buildings and find that it's not there, there may be a new job for you there, Steve, going and finding missing fire stopping. But I suspect it's something that the HSE people will be, or the building safety regulator people will be on to. And again, in terms of what people can do now, if you're managing a building that's going to be within the scope of the new safety case regime, what are you doing to establish the state of fire stopping in that building today? Because it's as much of a hazard to the residents today as it will be when the bill becomes an act.
One of the things, taking that forward a little bit, one of the things that is, who'd have thought that we'd have had the word fire stopping in the national press for the last couple of years? I mean, sadly, Grenfell has thrust this into the national consciousness. Unfortunately, fire stopping is mainly known for not being where it should be, and so we're hearing about all these inspections by the insurance companies or the landlords, and finding that the expected fire stopping isn't there. That sure, if nothing else, should put I guess a big spotlight on how we as an industry should be getting our house in order. I don't know whether everybody agrees that fire stopping should be there should be a basic level of knowledge of fire stopping amongst the HVAC sector. That's kind of a thing that I threw into the ether once. I don't know whether anybody wants to come back on that, or should it purely be a specialist's area? Steve, you're nodding. Steve first and then Peter.
Yeah, I think it should. I've got 3 filing cabinets here, which are totally full, plus the loft in the office next door, of jobs that I won't never throw them away. They're years and years old, but I've been there. They've asked me about it. I've explained it. I've spec'd the job for them. I've even told them how to access it. You put your price in, they go, oh, that's too dear. Reason being, Fred's blog son's down the road. Oh, yeah, you'll be a fire stopper. You've done it for a week. They're walking on site. I know it ain't correct. They've used incorrect materials. It's been installed incorrectly, without a shadow of a doubt. They've cheated on the thicknesses of the paint. The primers are not right. Nothing's comparable. But price rules the job. It's a race to the bottom. Yes, it should be on its own, but it needs a lot more training and prove that you've been trained, not just buy on site. Now, I'm a qualified lagger by trade. I've got a gold card and all the rest of it, but I run it in parallel with fire stopping on turbines in power stations, boiler rooms, God knows what else, to compartmentise the rooms. So you learn from all the different trades. But again, we go back to, trying to put this in a nice way, all right, your correct training, right? Now, these jobs I'm telling you about that I've been to, they will open the door, they go, that's too much money, close the door, we'll do a little bit. Okay, fine. But it never gets done. Next thing you know, I've been on 30, 40, 50, 60 jobs. Within a week or a month, have caught light, burned to the ground, including some recent big ones. And it's all over money. And one was as little as £12,000. It's now £30 million of damage. Because the money was too expensive. Can you do it for 5? No. It's price driven. Everything is price driven. Now, if you're used to driving a forklift and all of a sudden you're a fire stopper and you're on £200 a day, you're doing well rather than 110 quid or something, or minimum wage. So you're going to get the job. I've got a level 2, yeah, you've got it. We see it every single day. It's driven down by the price. My batting average has always been 9 or maybe 10 in 10, always, ever since I come in the game. I'm lucky to hit 4 now.
Really?
Yeah, I'm lucky.
So at a very basic level, now again, this is a journalist looking in over the parapet, so correct me if I'm wrong. The HVAC sector, they're the guys that put the holes in the walls and the ceilings. So you'd like to think that there's a fundamental basic level of knowledge that you've got to do something about that hole that you put in the wall or the ceiling. But I'm sort of gathering that that's over the years that's kind of ebbed away, that basic knowledge. So Peter, you were going to come in there. I don't know whether I'm introducing the same subject or changing it completely.
I can change it back again, don't worry. No, yes, you're right. I mean, the hole in the wall, but I mean, I think one of the key things as well is that, particularly with existing buildings, that there are no records kept of where these holes are, where fire penetrations are, and what people have done to them. There's no records at all. What we've got to do, certainly to start with, is on all new buildings, make sure that the records are kept up to date, and not only the records of where the holes are, but photographs of the holes, and who actually made the hole, who did the fire stopping, what are their skills, and let's keep records of all their skills and what they actually did. So we've got a complete evidence. The other problem also is when you actually do the fire stopping in say a brand new building, it's handed over to the client. He comes in with someone else, perhaps to put his IT in for him, and they drill holes through the nice new fire stopping without any consideration whatsoever. So that's another area I think we need to address as well. I think records, of new buildings is very, very important. The existing buildings, obviously, you've got a bit of a problem with, and it isn't just a hole. We can't share the same hole with ducts and pipes. So there's all sorts of rules and regulations, and we've all seen horror stories. I think we've got a photograph in the penetration document of the last gap in the hole to be filled up was actually with the tube of sealant, the actual tube itself. So. There are horror stories. Steve must have seen thousands of them, I'm sure. I don't get to see quite so many these days, but I think records are really important. We should start making sure people turn to the book when they go to site, see what's happened, see where the holes are, and then backtrace to see what's happened with them. I think it's gone wrong.
A member of the audience has made the valid point that yes, the fire stopping is important, but we should also very much bear in mind all the trades that come after. It's a bit like what you were saying, Peter, but all the following trades that you could have put your fire stopping in and sealed everything perfectly, and then your follow-on trades compromise it completely. So it's that unified message, isn't it? And I guess it is about raising the importance up the sort of the mind.
Yeah,
that's a bad metaphor, so I better move on. How are you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to draw a parallel. People know if there's a piece of electrical installation and they want to do some follow-on work, they know that they need to be careful, because if that electrical installation is live, particularly in an existing building, and they hit it, they may have some problems. We haven't got that level of awareness and understanding around fire stopping. I don't want to disagree with Steve, but and it's really important that the people who do fire stopping know what they're doing. But I think it's also really important that everybody understands that the minute you start making holes in fire compartment walls, you need to be making sure that they are made good properly by people who know what they're doing. And if that's not you, you've got a responsibility to make sure it gets done. And I think the problem we've got is that there's far too little understanding that making holes in fire compartments is a big deal.
Yeah.
So how do we address that? That's the question.
Well, again, for the smaller businesses, I think they've got some training to do.
Yeah. And I think the document that we've produced, if you like, is aimed at obviously showing people what to look for. So hopefully that will actually encourage people to sit around the table in the early stages to make sure on the new buildings, of course, to make sure that it's all done properly with the right people in place, taking the right precautions, and as Hal said, making sure that tradesmen don't come along afterwards and damage what you've actually done, which is a common occurrence at the moment.
I'm just smiling because there's an anecdote just been sent in from the audience about a job they discovered where the hole had been fire stopped with steel wool. So don't do that at home, I guess, is the question there. But it just shows the level. I mean, I keep coming back to before Grenfell caused us all to stop and think. And I guess people were a little, we must say there was a complacency afoot, or a mixture of complacency and ignorance. I remember somebody in the fire industry telling me that the mastic he would refer to as magic mastic, and when you probably heard this, for the benefit of the audience, when asked why is it called magic, he said because they think it solves everything, and as soon as it hits the fire, it goes up in a puff of smoke. But it's like it is, this, like Steve was saying earlier, mastic as the catch-all for everything. It's got to be stopped, isn't it? We've got to, and I'll just roll in another question that's come in, which is, I'll be interested in your comments. Does the panel think that Grenfell is really going to do something when the inquiry is finished in terms of changing the regulations around this? I don't know who wants to answer that.
I personally,
yeah, everybody does. So Andrew first.
Sorry, guys. I mean, I would say we're massively changing already. I think we as a manufacturer are noticing a huge change in the industry and the customers that we deal with in a positive way. Most of the serious contractors in this sort of field are taking it extremely seriously, and are reaching out to us as a manufacturer for support in terms of training, as I mentioned earlier, and I think all of us are finding the demands of that quite difficult, but it's a positive thing to do, and we've like I say, we've invested heavily in trying to help on that front, and I'm sure other manufacturers of the similar products, I would hope, are doing a similar thing. But certainly, I would say, the last 2 years has been a massive step change in the demands on us as a manufacturer for that sort of support. So, whether legislation changes or not, it feels very much that the industry is changing. I don't know if everybody feels that, but certainly that's our experience. It's a massive change. It's probably, there's still lots to be done. That we can't be complacent as to where it is, but so far, I would say it's completely turned on its head in terms of the amount of support that's needed.
I think one of the things that, as Peter was referring to earlier, is that we need to be prepared that because fire stopping is by nature usually hidden, I think the problem is going to be around for a long time, because apart from the insurance companies wanting inspections in a number of cases, there's going to be a lot of buildings where I imagine it will remain hidden until, and the only time you find out is when something happens, something is broken into or something goes wrong. Interested to now, we have to tread slightly sensitively around the Grenfell inquiry, but I'll try and take it in a very general sense to Andrews. Product is getting a bad name in the Grenfell inquiry at the moment. So my question is really, have you sort of felt a bit of a knock-on effect that the emphasis now is very much on quality and transparency?
For us, I mean, we would always said we were hopefully always doing the right thing anyway, but as a business, we've invested in a furnace for ourselves. So we do our own fire testing now, whereas we used to, put that out to the BRE and the like. So, we've invested in a furnace so we can test our own product regularly, installation methods, all of that sort of thing, and develop new products through it, obviously, as well. So, yeah, I think definitely for us, product and product quality is something that is a demand on us, and we need to be absolutely make sure we've got the right product for whatever use it's being put to, and hence that sort of investment.
Yeah, I think if I can just mention that I agree with what's been said there, and also there's a massive push now for going out to test existing fire dampers and to clean them as well, to make sure that they're maintained properly. This has never happened over the years. There's projects there that are probably 50, 40 years old that just have never had a test on a fire damper. This is huge at the moment. And these are actually this week are going to update their fire damper installation and maintenance guidance. So that'll be out this week free as well, people. But it is showing that people are going around now inspecting the fire dampers, which in turn means that they're inspecting where the fire dampers are positioned, which may not be in the wall, like some of them aren't. So there's hundreds of thousands like that, I'm sure. So the awareness is actually being recorded now on projects. So hopefully it's going to cost a lot of money to change some of them. And if you had to replace a fire damper in an existing system, for example, you're talking 2, 3, up to £10,000 by the time you get building work and pipe work and things move, but it is moving. And so I think the awareness is definitely happening, and they'll continue to improve and get more and more and more strict, so that hopefully you don't have to keep going back.
So in terms of the training, we talked about training earlier and how we would generally agree that we need more of it. Do we need more of it? Do we need specific roles in fire stopping? I guess for the audience, not everybody might be familiar with, is fire stopper an actual position, Steve, or is that something that people refer to themselves as, or can they have a card that says, just in very basic terms, what qualification can you have?
Oh, the CITB, I believe, don't even recognise it as an industry. It's like when you go and get your level 2, you have to have it independently certified, officially. But it's like we were talking about earlier. It just seems the way of the world at the moment is the biggest topic is a burning issue, which is fire. So it's easy. Well, let's all just jump into fire, and then we're moving away from our existing jobs. We're all trying to learn on the quick as much as you can suck, absorb. Yeah, look at this job here, it looks brilliant. Look into the nuts and bolts of it, and it won't work. The test houses are being bombarded with questions. They answer every day. They speak to me daily. And some of the questions they get asked is just ridiculous. And they say, we get fed up with it, but we have to ask it. And then they'll ask again and again and again the same questions, which I get daily. I've done this job, I'm a builder. We're down the road. Would you be able to certify it? No. Sorry, I can't. So what do? Take it out and employ a company with third-party accreditation. Let them certify it, because they're guaranteeing their work. How can I guarantee your work? It's a knock-on effect all down the line. So it's a big rush, but it's also a rush for the bottom for money. So anyone who can invent something, bring it out, yeah, great. If it's anything to do with saving lives, I'm there. Go for it, yeah, definitely. But you can't all have the bite of one apple, because the way it is now, it's who you know, not what you know. And more often than not, every time I go back to look at the job that I've lost, it's failed. And you know what I'm told? Don't care. I've got my certificate. Don't care. It's in my hand. Electricians, I won't say where, 3 tower blocks doing all the fire stopping through the cables. What, and they've got level 2? No, they've been trained by the manufacturer. That's 3 large tower blocks, and the electricians are doing their own fire stopping. I can imagine what that's like.
So I think that's something where the association, it's a mental note where the associations can look into how we how we sort of raise this compliance and competence up the chain, as it were. I've got a question coming in, which is, can I ask Peter where the pressure for the fire damper testing has come from? Is it from the end users, from authorities, or from insurers?
Well, not so much, I don't think, from insurers, although they're obviously very keen to get this rectified. But I actually do genuinely think that when when the cleaning, ductwork cleaning has changed considerably over the past years, as you're probably aware, all systems are now cleaned regularly, or not all, but a lot of them. And I think they were finding that fire dampers weren't being tested and cleaned and whatever else. So our own people have actually been realizing that this isn't happening. And I've talked to maintenance engineers in major developments and shopping centres and whatever else, and they've come on and said, well, how often should these fire dampers be tested? And they should be tested every year, a job test. Well, they've been in for 10, 20, 30 years, and no one's ever looked at them. So you just don't know whether they'd work or not. So I think it's coming a lot of it from within the industry, to be honest with you. People are actually realizing that this is not happening. And there's a massive business now for actual fire damper testing and the placement as necessary, fusible links, everything. And I'm sure that Swigan are aware of that as well, what's going on. And they've got their own engineers, I think, doing the same thing. All this is obviously good. And I think it will continue. And hopefully, of course, it will remain that as new buildings come along and hopefully go back on existing buildings, we will get into this proper maintenance sort of schedule of making sure that dampers and fire stopping is correct. But it's going to take some time, obviously. I mean, there must be millions of fire dampers in the UK which haven't been tested since they've been installed. It's quite scary, actually. Quite scary.
I sense an early campaign for Actuate UK. How around fire safety?
Quite possibly, Andrew.
Yeah.
Can I go back to the question about whether the inquiry would recommend legislation? Because I'm afraid that question causes me a mild concern.
Okay.
If we know there are problems with fire stopping, and having listened to 3 people who are out there doing it day in, day out in various guises, and what Peter and Steve and Andrew have already told us, we know there's a problem. Why do we need to wait for some legislation? We need to go and do something about it now. And, I hear what Steve says about the problems of a race to the bottom. Dame Judith identified it, it's still going on. But those that want to do the right thing need to start doing the right thing today, not waiting until there's an Act of Parliament.
Yeah.
That's a challenge then. Sorry, Steve, you're going to say something?
Oh yeah, no, I'll make you absolutely right. That's what Hackett said.
Yeah, but
don't wait for tomorrow.
It's one of those. I'm sensing it is one of those areas where it needs an element of self-organisation to get to grips with the issue.
Do we ever learn? Do you remember back 1968, Ronan Point, gas disaster? I was 9 years old, standing at the bottom of that, because my nan was in it. And after that, they said, no more gas in buildings. How many times do we go to the tower blocks and still gas, which have been installed in new build as well? Loads, because it's pipe in pipe. The venting is not large enough for pipe in pipe, not for them floors. Because to make gas rise, you've got to make it heat. You've got to heat it.
There's a whole other conversation. It's almost like you're teeing us up for the next summit in October, September, October time, which is about low carbon heating, and we can discuss hydrogen. We can discuss the increased electric load from the new regime. But we can't do that now, Steve. We've got to talk about fire safety here and now, and we have about 5 minutes left. So what I want from each of you really is, what's the one big takeaway for the audience? We've sort of agreed that this is the audience that is often responsible for making the penetrations, but at the same time, very much the sector that can help the rest of the industry solve their problems with fire safety. So what is the takeaway? Who wants to go first? I won't do it like that because that never works. All right, Peter, you go first, and then I'll go to Steve, and then Andrew, then Hal. How about that? Peter first.
Well, on new builds, I think it's really important, vitally important, to obviously we can start off with a new build and get it right. So early engagement, I think, is the key. Get the fire stopping people involved right at the very beginning and make everybody aware of what they've got to do. So that at least from here on, the problem doesn't get worse on new buildings. And we can also make everybody aware, of course, that when they're installing, have a look at what's actually been installed already, make the clients aware, make the insurers aware. The insurers are going to be on the back of this as well. They want to see what's going on. I am glad to see manufacturers and the likes of Visa and Sibsy very much pushing forward all of these safety issues. So there is a lot happening, and a lot has happened in the last 2 years and will continue, I'm sure. So I'm confident in that respect. I think it will get a lot better than what it is at the moment.
Okay, so Steve.
Easiest way, best way, quickest way, clerk of the works. Clerk of the works.
Yeah.
Just get him to inspect. You've done one floor, let him inspect it, close it up, boom. When he walks in, you shake. If you don't, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Because you will not get past until he signs it off. Then that will sort the cowboys out.
If Peter Baker were here, he'd be saying that is exactly what the building safety regulator is there to enforce. He's not here. So we go to Andrew next.
Again, I'd mirror Peter's comments of early engagement. For us, I think it's key from consultants right through to M&E contractors, ductwork contractors. If we're all party to the original design, understand and have explored that design, then all parties are heading towards a compliant installation, and that's ultimately where it's got to start from. And I think if the early engagement's happened, it's so much smoother. As soon as we're trying to sort of catch up further down the chain, as it were, the hole sizes are wrong, there's all sorts of other issues, which then creates this argument over, price and non-compliance and all of those sort of things. So early engagement's key, really.
Thank you, Andrew. And Hal.
Go with that. I'm also conscious that the cowboys aren't listening in because they're busy earning some money. So the people who are listening in are from the reputable end of the industry. And I've just got one question that I think we should all, and that includes the five of us on the panel, we should go away. What could we do tomorrow? What one more thing could we do tomorrow that would help to make the business we're in or the people that we work for and with able to do fire stopping that bit better and that bit more safely? Because if everybody's looking for a way to improve, then that's at least getting the people who are doing it right, doing it better. We can't sort out the cowboys on our own. And that's maybe a message we need to remind not just Peter Baker, but others. I suspect Peter knows that very well, actually. He's been in the business long enough. He's probably seen more cowboys than the rest of us. We can't sort out the cowboys on our own. We can sort out what we do ourselves on our own.
Thank you, Hal. I'm just imagining Peter Baker as a sort of sheriff character rounding up cowboys now. As the fifth member of the panel, what I'd like to see now, whether this is at all possible or not, I don't know. Something like an awareness, a fire awareness for the M&E sector, basic module in every training that everybody who works in HVAC has to pass. Whether that's like an endorsement on a card in its own right or not, I don't know. But I think personally, I think you've got to start the fundamentals and work up. Maybe Peter can turn the guide into a course. Who knows?
There is a lot of work going on, I must admit, back at Visa for obviously sort of training and whatever else. So I think we need to step it up. Yeah, absolutely, sure.
I think if we do nothing else today, it's to raise the awareness of awareness around fire safety. And for that, I thank you, gentlemen, for your input today. We said 45 minutes might be a long stretch, but like the Cheltenham Gold Cup, we've managed it in a trice. So thank you very much. Unlike the Cheltenham Gold Cup, nobody wins anything on this, but you get my grateful thanks, and I allow you to fade away into the distance as I do my Jerry Springer-like closing monologue to the screen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
As I watch as you all fade away. Just waiting for Andrew to turn his video off so you're not joining me on the final call. Okay, there he goes. So it just remains for me to thank everybody who's had an input today, to speakers, to panelists, to the audience. We must again thank our sponsors, without whom this sort of thing is not possible. So that's to Swagon, to Xylem, and to Panasonic. So thanks for their input too. I can't run an event like this without the support of my organising colleagues. So a big vote of thanks to Sophie and to Amelia behind the scenes, and of course to Neil, front of house. And the housekeeping is to say the recording will be available tomorrow morning, I think, or tomorrow afternoon. And we will be hoping to put all the presentations into the email to attendees. And the final thing is to say, keep talking to us. IAQ, building safety, fire safety, all important topics that we at H&V News want to keep talking about. And if you have something that we think we're not talking about, please do get in touch. But thank you very much for your time. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say there's another summit coming up in the autumn, which will be the other half of our big issues of 2021, which is, of course, low carbon heating, hydrogen heat pumps, and even perhaps microwave boilers. We'll be talking about that. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.